Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of congregational humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. Thank you for joining us.
So 250 years ago, after years of increasing oppression on the part of the British government towards American colonists, members of the Second Continental Congress adopted a resolution that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. A committee of 5, chaired by Thomas Jefferson, was appointed to draft the Declaration of Independence, with Jefferson acting as the primary author. Jefferson borrowed freely from existing documents, and he later explained that he was not striving for originality of principle or sentiment. Instead, he hoped his words served as an expression of the American mind. On July 2nd, 1776, Congress voted to declare independence, and 2 days later, it ratified the text of the Declaration. Reverend Jacqueline Brett, lead minister of the Eno River UU Fellowship of Durham, North Carolina, pointed out that our founding fathers were inspired by what already existed among the indigenous people of the region, namely the Iroquois Confederacy, who were already living under their declared democratic principles and practices of collective decision-making, individual rights, and community responsibility and democratic governance. It was actually their model that inspired the rhetoric and ideals that America was founded upon. Brett remarked that she felt this was the ultimate act of misappropriation. So this morning, Phil, Mikki, and Polly will offer reflections on aspects of this bold, aspirational document and the associated Bill of Rights of the Constitution. Let me begin by reading the introduction and first sentence of the preamble. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separation and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impels them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
When I began my 50s nearly a decade ago, I set a goal for myself of having at least one adventure every year, which meant I would travel someplace new and preferably someplace that had some sort of special meaning. It worked, and I found myself traveling to all parts of the country. And as the decade wore on, I realized I was within striking distance of seeing all 48 contiguous states, and I thought, well, why not? And so I began taking trips in the past couple of years, really just so I could cross the remaining states off my list. Last year, with a few states to go, I looked at the map and saw that 5 of these states were all kind of clustered together. I could do a road trip, perhaps. The challenge for me was which states these were. Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. None was a state I would have considered visiting if not for this dumb goal. I really just associated them with bigotry and backwardness. Maybe not fair, but that was the case. Nonetheless, I set this goal, and as Eleanor Roosevelt said, you must do something every day that scares you, and I thought, well, this counts. But I realized that I could organize this trip around a theme of civil rights. because in each of these states there were locations where something momentous had occurred in that arena. If I could focus on those things, it would make this entire trip workable. And so with that, last month, I set out. I started in Birmingham at a small park downtown, the Kelly Ingram Park. Now, if you don't recognize the name, this was the site that became infamous in the 1960s as where Bull Connor, the local law enforcement chief, attacked peaceful protesters who were trying to march to City Hall, attacking them with vicious dogs and water cannon to prevent them from being able to complete their march. The morning I was there, it was a very pretty park, very quiet, not many people walking around, but you knew that this was a place of memory because it was packed with monuments to the events that had occurred there, events which shocked the conscience of the nation. Kitty corner from the park, by the way, is the 16th Street Baptist Church, which also became infamous in 1963. It was the location of a bombing that tore through the building and killed 4 young women who were in the basement. It's still an active congregation in a beautiful building, which holds the memory of that attack. After Birmingham, I went to Montgomery, which is the home of a location called the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, a memorial to the thousands of African Americans who were lynched in the 19th and 20th centuries, primarily down south, but in a number of states throughout the Union, including Minnesota. These killings typically occurred with the connivance, if not open support, of local authorities. In this outdoor memorial, it's a little hard to describe, but what you find as you go in, you're surrounded by these vertical, metal, three-dimensional rectangular objects that are suspended from just above your head. And you're walking among them, and each one of these objects is engraved with the name of a county and a state where lynchings occurred, and beneath them, the names of the people who were victims and the dates on which these events took place. There are hundreds of them. As you walk through the memorial, these objects continue to be suspended from above, but the path you're walking on keeps going down and down, so that as you walk through it, it appears that these objects are getting higher and higher. And by the time you wind up at the end, each one of them has come to represent, in a very stylized way, a body hanging from a tree. It was very powerful. From Alabama, I made my way through a corner of Mississippi, enough said, on my way to Memphis. In Memphis, my goal was the Lorraine Motel, which, as you may know, is the location where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April 1968. Perhaps like many of you, over the years I had seen the iconic picture of King on the balcony of that hotel among his colleagues. And then in a photo taken moments later, King is no longer visible, and the colleagues are standing there pointing in the direction of where the assassin was stationed across the street. I was standing just feet away from where this unbelievable event had occurred. It's a location that is marked still by a large wreath, and they've left 60s-era cars parked in the parking lot just below that balcony as well. You even had the opportunity to look into the room where King had just been in before walking onto that balcony. It was incredibly moving. From Memphis, I headed west to Little Rock. The neighborhood around the Little Rock Central High School was quite quiet. It was a Saturday afternoon, very sunny, quite warm. The building is beautiful. I learned that the school had opened in the late 1920s, and at the time it received national media attention as being the most expensive and fancy high school in the country. 30 years later, of course, it was the site of massive demonstrations in support of state-sanctioned segregation in that high school, among countless others, and where the United States military had to be deployed in order to escort 9 young students into that building, simply so they could go to school. There's a visitor center nearby where you can see pictures and listen to recordings of the kinds of things that were said and done to those young people in 1957. And it was, to say the least, sobering to be reminded that these were people who look a lot like me saying and doing those things. From Little Rock, I completed my journey by getting over to Tulsa. In the early 20th century, Tulsa was the home of the Greenwood neighborhood, referred to as Black Wall Street. It was a successful African-American community where people thrived and businesses were successful. In 1921, white people who lived in that city turned a misunderstood incident into an excuse to destroy the neighborhood. Block after block of businesses and homes were torched. People were terrorized. And even though this was plainly an attack by white people on black people, very quickly the entire affair was blamed on the black victims. The city rounded up black people for their safety, it was said, and kept them in camps for a while. They could be released if they proved that they were working. I was shocked to see the violence and imagine all that had happened. In going to all of these sites, I gained a degree of insight that I hadn't had before into how deep and how broad and how imposing the edifice of Jim Crow segregation truly was, and how many different ways it played itself out in this country, founded on an idea that all of us are created equal. I gained a newfound respect for the people who stood up against it, a profound respect for the African Americans of Tulsa who overcame the hostility of the government, gathered what was left, and rebuilt their community. I was surprised to learn that the glory days of that neighborhood actually were yet to come. I came to appreciate how strong and how courageous those 9 high school students in Little Rock had to be to withstand the vitriol and the violence and the ostracism that was directed at them and their families and their communities for years to come. Not just by neighbors, but by the system itself. I came to further appreciate the incredible leadership and vision of Martin Luther King in leading an incredible, successful movement to fight back against the legal system of segregation, a system previously upheld by the highest court in the land. I was incredibly moved to think about what it must have been like in Montgomery for Rosa Parks and others who refused to give up their seats on a city bus, divided as a matter of law. And in Birmingham, to imagine the strength of those residents, particularly young people, who simply wanted to march to City Hall to demand an end to the injustice and what they had to face in order to do that. I knew all of these things from reading history books and seeing documentaries on TV, but to actually physically be there, to be there in the very locations where these events occurred, left an impression no textbook could convey. The idea set forth in the Declaration of Independence that we're all created equal was a dream that was not fully realized for so many people for so long. It is a dream that has yet to be fully realized, as every day's news reminds us. Perhaps at some point we'll get there. What my little driving tour through the South reminded me was that, then as now, the government itself frequently was a part of the problem. And that if there is to be progress in terms of making this idea a reality, that progress is going to come from everyday people, from all walks of life, people like us. It's going to happen on the buses, the congregations, the parks, the schools, the neighborhoods. It's going to happen because these communities will preserve the history of what good work has been done and will continue to inspire us to keep pushing on. I went down south apprehensive and skeptical. I came home inspired. Instead of bigotry and backwardness, I was reminded of the courage and commitment of people who put it all on the line to move this country forward. Rather than paying attention to whatever nonsense is taking place in Washington this weekend, heading south allowed me to connect with the story and people who truly embody the kind of ideals this country was originally founded on. This is the story I want to celebrate. Why did I wait so long to make this visit?
The preamble continues. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
So as we, the people of this country, we can withhold our consent. Government today is destructive, as we easily see with ICE agents in our cities. If we decide a new foundation with principles and reorganized powers that improve our safety and happiness is our right to establish, what might that look like? I'll borrow a few ideas today from some of the people I've featured recently at the Minnesota Women's Press website. Unfortunately, we can no longer afford to print 10,000 free copies, including the stash I normally brought here to First Unitarian Society. But this is some of what is in the print magazine that we sent to members who are paying opt-in members to get the magazine. We mailed those last week. Amy Stager, for example, is a labor writer who provided a commentary for our 250 years issue this month. She wrote, "Increasingly, we see evidence of the CEOs, tech lords, and billionaires who profit off the work done by people who struggle to pay for food, fuel, and a safe space for family to live. Whose freedom is that? Jobs are threatened by artificial algorithms. Ongoing payments for insurance deny us coverage to a dwindling access to health centers. Whose freedom is that? Young adults are sinking under a mountain of debt from post-secondary training and degrees. Our air and water are filled with toxins from consolidated farms and incinerators. Whose freedom is that?" She continued, "Yes, this is a depressing picture of ongoing exploitation and extraction that has always shaped our country. Yet as we know, Minnesotans also show what true freedom might actually be. Life-giving connections and networks, especially visible in the grip of crisis impacting our neighbors and us. A world where we don't have to fight to live is at our fingertips. We shouldn't have to fight for it, but we do, and we must." One basic principle Amy suggested: change our policy about how we tax the wealthy. As she wrote, "If the wealthiest 1% paid taxes consistently, the way the rest of us do, and paid workers livable wages, we wouldn't need government safety nets or philanthropic mutual aid. We could feed and house and care for everyone who labors for those profits." The Guardian News pointed out recently that there are 32 billionaires who owe their wealth to low-wage corporations, including 8 billionaires from Walmart and 3 from DoorDash. Starbucks has the largest gap in pay, with a CEO compensated $95.8 million, while his company's employees average $14,674. Consumers, as well as the governed, can withhold their consent. Another suggestion Amy pointed out is a narrative change we can all be part of. Quote, "The propaganda many people seem to have bought into is that it is the lower classes, not the upper classes, who are leaving us hungry. Too many of our neighbors seem to be ignoring the fraud perpetrated at the highest levels." Stacey Abrams of Georgia was in town recently to talk at a Women Winning event. She said another important step for all of us is to engage the 90 million Americans who skipped the election in 2024. She said, quote, "They're not apathetic, they're despondent because they live in communities that never change." We know the solutions people have pointed out that would be impactful in the long run. For example, in 1963, President Kennedy's Presidential Commission on the Status of Women released a report recommending national paid maternity leave, greater access to education, and support for child care. That was more than 60 years ago. And to that list, I would add the work by advocates over the many decades to better address housing affordability and gender-based violence. Such little movement needs unified public pressure that we can more emphatically give our consent to. Our founding humanist minister, John Dietrich, recognized 100 years ago from the growing field of psychology that putting people into jail without rehabilitation efforts does nothing lasting to deter crime. I met recently with a group of young people in Loring Park who are involved in restorative justice to divert people at the front end of trouble before they get more entrenched in the wrong activities. We could proactively ask for that more emphatically, too. I've learned from a few people lately about all the far-right anti-immigrant rhetoric that happens globally. One of them, Sophia Benet of France, reminded people at the recent National AFL-CIO convention in Minneapolis that saying that we are against something is not enough. Quote, "We have to offer strong alternatives to win hearts and minds, otherwise it is empty values." She encapsulated the sentiment of many labor organizers, quote, "While they are trying to turn the clock back, we are building unity." I met wonderful rural women organizing around candidates and issues at an event in the woods of Aiken County. I'll be writing soon about their frustrations about how some rural women candidates are not getting endorsement dollars from the DFL, for example, because the DFL is concerned that women candidates still cannot win in Greater Minnesota. So these women are unifying around their own mutual aid support, informally dubbed the People's Potluck Party. As we talk about regularly at First Unitarian Society, there is a lot for humans to do, and part of our purpose is to simply keep doing it. I published an essay recently by Joan Redwing that included this nugget. Quote, "The remarkable thing about the United States is not that our institutions are perfect, it is that generation after generation we continue debating how to make them better. Democracy has always been an unfinished project." I'll close this compilation of perspectives about a few ways we could more emphatically declare together what to rebuild by slightly adapting a quote from George Orwell's novel 1984. Quote, "In the long run, a hierarchical society was only possible on a basis of poverty and ignorance. There is deliberate policy to keep even the favored groups somewhere near the brink of hardship, because a general state of scarcity increases the importance of small privileges and thus magnifies the distinction between one group and another. War is waged by each ruling group against its own subjects to keep this scarcity structure of society intact. The consent of the governed works best in unity with values clearly and loudly stated to create a democracy that lives up to the potential our founders envisioned 250 years ago. Toward this end, on a more personal front, the good news is that I have begun the transition of Minnesota Women's Press ownership to a consumer-owned media co-op that I'm building with people. We will continue to online showcase people power voices supported by Minnesotans rather than simply by a dwindling supply of advertisers. It is people power that can reshape governments and impact corporate management, and the role of Minnesota Women's Press will continue to be to amplify the power of those voices. Some of the People's Power agenda that I talked about here just now will be part of that ongoing content development agenda. Let me know what else needs to be added to this agenda. That is what I hope the country's pioneering consumer-owned media co-op can provide as a communications tool. Thank you.
Good morning. As Shelley said, I'm focusing on the little part, the very small part of the declaration. We're trying to find a new way of because the old way is not working, although I will say that reading that list of complaints against King George seems pretty much like reading off of today's newspaper. So, you may have seen this page developed by the American Humanist Association Center for Education called the 10 Commitments to provide a secular ethical framework for daily living as a response to the 10 Commandments. I recently, in an OLLI class, came across a book that is kind of a response to the Bill of Rights. And so I wanted to talk about that today as a way that we can maybe move forward to build our more nearly perfect union. Quoting from the Council on Foreign Relations webpage, so that I don't have to reinvent it, the Council on Foreign Relations former President Richard Haass offers a guide of how we must reinvent citizenship if American democracy is to survive in a book called The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens. In the Bill of Obligations, Haass argues that for American democracy to survive, or better yet thrive, the very idea of citizenship must be revised and expanded. Haass's solution is to place obligation on an equal footing with rights. The 10 obligations that Haass introduces here are essential for healing our divisions and safeguarding the country's future. They re-envision what is meant to be an American citizen, and they represent commitments that we make to fellow citizens and to the country to uphold democracy and counter the growing apathy, anger, selfishness, division, disinformation, and violence that threaten us all. The first half of the book is devoted to rights and their limits and the cause and consequences of the democratic deterioration. The second half introduces 10 obligations for good citizenship that, if adopted by U.S. citizens, would go a long way towards ameliorating issues. So that's the end of the quote. So here they are. I'm going to give a short paragraph after each one because we're running pretty late. Number 1, be informed. We need to understand how the government and economy work and our history, which allow us to vote and to interact with officials and hold them accountable. Reading foundational documents and listening to reputable news sources help us to know the difference among facts, misstatements, opinions, and recommendations. Number 2, get involved. Of course, voting is fundamental and helping other citizens vote is crucial. One can be an election judge and support candidates with your time and money. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Number 3, stay open to compromise. Compromise is essential to getting things done in a democracy and keeps differing parties talking over time. Building broad support for decisions make them less likely to be overturned. What is gained must be equal to or greater than what is given up, and we seem to think that any compromise is bad. We should hold fast to the fundamental principles, but find room to compromise in the scope and pace of change. Work for a deal that can be negotiated over no deal at all. So compromise has to be defended and explained if it is to be received well. Number 4, remain civil. Civility is essential and is trust over cynicism. Civility allows differences to be reduced or bridged. As UUs, we believe in treating others with dignity and respect, the right of free expression, so we're right there on that one. Number 5, reject violence. We have an obligation to accept the legitimacy of the process and that no particular issue merits undermining the value of the political system as a whole. Rather than violence, consider civil disobedience, but be willing to accept the penalties involved. A fair and responsive system requires an active, free press. Number 6, value norms. Norms are the unwritten traditions and rules that reduce friction in a society. They are related to the spirit and intent of the law, but generally cannot be written into law. Examples of norms are giving to charity, telling the truth, accepting election results as legitimate. Officials should not use government processes to their advantage or personal gain. That's a norm we should be living with. Number 7, promote the common good. We all have a stake in the well-being of society. Maximizing individual autonomy and minimizing government intervention cannot come at the expense of the collective welfare. Examples include indoor smoking bans and vaccination efforts. Past instances of inequality need to be considered, but in a manner that minimizes grievances. If you offend the people you are trying to convince, it's harder to convince them. Number 8, respect government service. We have morphed into a distrust of government on both sides of the political divide. Our reaction to imperfect government should be to create a more perfect government, not no government. We should aspire to have the best and brightest working for the government and consider making government service more common and therefore better known to citizens by incentivizing service. Perhaps we could build a civilian climate corps. Number 9, support the teaching of civics. This is my big one. Civics education supports our collective identity of what it means to be a citizen in the United States. Civics courses should be required in high school and college to teach habits, rights, and obligations of democracy. Number 10, and final one, put country first. Putting the country and democracy ahead of party or person is an essential element of patriotism and requires character and virtue. Haas exhorts us to think institutionally, subordinating short-term considerations to long-term health of the institution with a higher loyalty to the law and the success of the country. Members in power must also act for the interest of the country, but will do it only if they are held to account by citizens and what used to be called the loyal opposition. Remember when they talked about that in British government? You could count on both sides. Haas concludes that American democracy will endure only if obligations join rights as the core of a widely held understanding of citizenship to encourage behaviors, norms, relationships, and arrangements that will buttress our democracy. Citizens have to demand that those who vote for citizens have to demand that those they vote for embrace these obligations. If we have to be a one-issue voter, we should place supporting democracy at the center. Take a stand on behavior. Our obligation is to leave the institution of democracy in better shape than we received it. So I stand here before you in my 4th of July and election judge shirt that I wear only 2 to 3 times a year, in the hopes that we may move closer to that perfect union that we are striving for. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.